Welcome to today's episode of M&A Plus, The Art After the Deal, where the integrators are the heroes. We are here to explore the details and strategies that shape the successful transformation of mergers and acquisitions beyond the initial agreements. In this episode, we have the privilege of welcoming a distinguished guest, Joanne Hirase-Stacey, a multi-talented professional who has worked as a general counsel and head of compliance. She is a commercial contracts expert and an accomplished writer and editor, among other talents. Joanne is currently serving an important role at Intuitive Edge as the managing attorney and VP of services, where she is embracing the challenges of navigating contract transition projects during acquisitions and divestitures. I can't wait to hear her share insights from her vast experience and her stories from being on the front line of M&A transitions. So welcome to the show, Joanne. So glad that you're on.
Lisa, I'm glad to be here.
Great. So let's get started with your background first. I'd like to hear about your career journey. Can you share a little bit about what you were doing early on in your career and how you became involved in compliance and what made you interested in working with Intuitive Edge?
Sure. Yeah, so I remember my dad telling me, choose a good career and a good company to work for because you'll be with that company for 40 years. And looking back, I have to say that working for several different organizations has really blessed me with terrific opportunities that have taught me a lot and given me insight into a lot of areas of the law, including compliance, because the industries that I've worked in are highly regulated. And in every situation, I was either the only attorney or one of two or three attorneys, so I ended up involved in pretty much every issue, and that's how I learned about compliance. So I started in the insurance industry, working in both auto and fire and casualty, so essentially every policy you can imagine. Then I went to a semiconductor company, and they make custom ASICs in the electronic, automotive, industrial, military, medical, and communications fields. And they also have a manufacturing plant, so you can imagine the compliance issues that we ran up against. And they sold to another company, so I moved on to the solar industry. And this company did solar installation, but they were also building a polysilicon manufacturing plant. So again, lots of compliance issues. And after we sadly filed for bankruptcy, I ended up at a university as the risk manager, chief compliance officer, and general counsel. And over the years, you can see that I've had to deal with regulatory compliance, getting and complying with permits. There's air quality, wastewater, asbestos, noise and lighting ordinances, lots of IRS tax issues. I've dealt with OSHA, the FDA, the Department of Transportation for transporting hazardous materials on highways, and then all the issues that you have with disposing of those hazardous materials. And there's quality compliance, ISO compliance, import and export, CTPAT, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission because of the national lab that the university jointly controlled. There's FERPA and HIPAA because the university had a health program and ran clinics. And of course, with that, you have drugs. So there was DEA compliance. Title IX is a concern for every university. There's Big Sky and NCAA compliance, housing, GDPR, privacy, lots of ADA issues, HR compliance, especially around hiring and firing, immigration, mass layoffs. There's records management compliance. I mean, it's just a lot. But I love compliance because it's fascinating to learn all of the regulations and the reasons why they exist. And I always tell people you can read the law and it might make perfect sense, but the difficulty always comes when you have to apply that law to a specific situation. And so going back to your question about why I was interested in working at Intuitive Edge, when I left the university, I decided I didn't want the 2.5-hour commute every day. And because I live in a remote area, no matter what, the commute is always at least that long. And I didn't want to work 70, 80, 90 hours a week and have all the stress that went with it. So just by pure luck, you posted a job for a project attorney to negotiate contracts, which is one of the favorite things that I do. And I knew that being able to work from home 25 to 30 hours a week was really what I needed at the time.
Wow, you have a lot of experience and a lot of insights, I'm sure, when it comes to our next topic, which is let's switch to kind of the M&A world where you're basically have compliance considerations and maybe how do you integrate those compliance considerations during an acquisition? And are there emerging trends that you're seeing that people, should be aware of?
Yes. So, of course, every company knows the basic compliance requirements for their business in terms of the products and services that they provide. So, for example, if the company is a covered entity, they know they have to comply with HIPAA. But the
Mm-hmm.
biggest issue that I've seen is that the new co is always in a rush to get systems stood up and make basic purchases so that they can operate without their parent. And they usually don't hire a compliance officer. The biggest issue that we see with companies right now in terms of compliance is data privacy. And
Mm-hmm.
into Edge, we're able to help our clients when we're negotiating contracts by asking the right questions and ensuring that a data privacy agreement is in place where it's necessary. But
Mm-hmm.
there's so much more to privacy compliance than
Mm-hmm.
just entering into an appropriate contract. You've got training, then there's risk assessments of suppliers before you onboard them, data mapping, having policies and procedures in place, a compliant privacy statement, and it takes just a lot of effort to put together a privacy program, but it's worth it in the end because then your customers know that you take privacy seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And it
Mm-hmm.
also keeps the newco from suffering from reputational damage if there's some kind of complaint against them for failing to comply or if they happen to have a data breach.
Yeah, good point. What are some of the most challenging risks that you've encountered and the strategies that you employed to mitigate them?
Well, quite honestly, people are probably the
Mm-hmm.
most challenging risk that you have because
Mm-hmm.
people do things. Usually it's unintentional, but when they do whatever it is that they do, it can
Mm-hmm.
increase your risk. And so a really good example is signing a contract without reading it. Now, we know as
Mm-hmm.
attorneys that contracts aren't gripping and edge of your seat exciting, but they are really the backbone of your company. So even
Mm-hmm.
a $2,000 contract can cause issues if you don't know what you've obligated yourself to, or if you haven't asked the right questions of the supplier to make sure that all the contractual requirements are included. But at Into Edge, we don't mind looking at every contract, even if it's not negotiable, because we
Mm-hmm.
want to be able to point out to that business unit all these terms that they're agreeing to that might be unfavorable. And if it's a showstopper, they can look for a
Mm-hmm.
new supplier or decide to accept the risk, but at least they are making an
Mm-hmm.
informed decision because of all the things that we're pointing out to them.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Post-merger integration is often considered the most challenging phase of M&A. Could you share your insights on ensuring a smooth transition from your perspective?
Sure. And you really can't ensure a smooth transition, but in the
Mm-hmm.
best transitions that Into Edge has worked on, we've been able to embed ourselves into the new co. And what I mean by that is we become a trusted partner to the new co, and we work alongside the employees almost as if we were almost an employee with them.
Mm-hmm.
And we have our proprietary processes, which we have proven over and over again that they really do work. And so when we step outside of those processes, that's when we start to experience the rough roads and some chaos, which really isn't very pleasant. But our processes are really solid. And when our
Mm-hmm.
clients get to experience the full value that Into Edge brings, we have very
Mm-hmm.
few hiccups. And as a
Mm-hmm.
bonus, we end up with repeat clients or new clients who heard about Into Edge from the NewCo employees who have seen us in action and know how beneficial that our services are.
Right. Let's talk about the technology side of it then. So technology is changing. I mean, it's a pretty fast changing area. We have a hard time keeping up with all the changes. So how do you think Intuitive Edge has adapted to these changes and what technologies have you found to be most effective in managing contracts during M&A activities?
We partner with the companies that have the technology need that we need, including AI solutions.
Mm-hmm.
And those tools make our jobs so much easier, whether it's tracking contract progress or finding the assignment clause in every contract to see if consent is required to assign. But what we're really thrilled about now is the Into-Edge branded solution that's currently
Mm-hmm.
being developed, and it will provide robust tracking, automation, dashboards, and we'll be able to integrate more AI into it. And we
Mm-hmm.
should be able to integrate it with our AI tools that we currently
Mm-hmm.
use. And so it's just going to be really fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And, as with all developments that are like this, we'll just keep improving our tool as we learn more from the client interactions or as our
Mm-hmm.
team grows and they bring new ideas and as technology continues to evolve. It's just a super exciting project, and it's just
Mm-hmm.
going to further enhance our processes that we
Mm-hmm.
already have.
Right. So do you have any, reflection on the amount of automation versus the amount of human analysis that's necessary in your, area of expertise?
It really does depend.
Mm-hmm.
That's the lawyerly
Mm-hmm.
answer to everything. It
Right.
depends.
It always
But
depends.
yes, and it's because some things really do need a human,
Mm-hmm.
So when we're using the tool to be able to look at the contract clauses or if we're using a tool to help us redline, you
Mm-hmm.
can't totally depend on it all the time. You can use it to do that first pass, but you never want to miss anything because that could be very detrimental to our
Mm-hmm.
clients. And so our attorneys, our project attorneys, they might say, yes, we can use this tool. However, to
Mm-hmm.
ensure that we are getting everything right and we are not missing anything that's really key, we're going
Mm-hmm.
to read through this anyway. But the AI that's coming out and
Mm-hmm.
all the things that it's able to do, especially when we need to find a clause really quickly over thousands of contracts, I mean, it's just really amazing. And so with our new tool, what we're hoping to be able to do is
Mm-hmm.
we capture metadata for our clients.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll want to know what the limitation of liability is, or maybe what the indemnification clause is. And so if we can use the tool to adapt that, it can just automatically populate those columns in the tracker instead of the attorney having to go and find it and copy and paste it and save
Mm-hmm.
it. So that's one of those beneficial AI tools that we're looking forward to integrating.
Yeah, definitely. It's just hard to kind of get a sense out of the all the different things that are available right now. It's
Yes.
quite a daunting task to see what actually works. So could you share a particularly challenging time or project that taught you an invaluable lessons within the context of M&A?
Yes, well, and this kind of ties into your last question a little bit. Before I came to Into Edge, I was involved in 3 different acquisitions. And in one of those, this is how many years ago it was,
Mm-hmm.
all of the contracts were on paper and they were
Mm-hmm.
stacked in my office because guess who was tasked with the diligence efforts of finding all the assignment clauses over 1,000 contracts and then having to scan them all and save them into a database.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing I did was I went to HR and I said, hey, do you have anybody who's on light duty? And
Mm-hmm.
they checked and I just lucked out because they sent this wonderful young man to assist me. So I came away with 2 things there. And so first, it's to use the tools that are available, whether it's human or now we're lucky to have automated systems and digital systems. But second, it's to surround yourself with the people who make work not feel like work. And this is one of the reasons that Into Edge thrives is because our people are very client focused and they're always thinking of ways to help and they bring so much positivity and great energy to work every single day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's actually an important aspect of working in a transitionary climate, actually, because
Yes.
M&A is always presented with the kind of the chaos and the change, and people side of it is actually really important part of it. And the way that our team interacts as a outside consultant is very, important, and it can actually have a positive impact on that process. from a people point of view. And I'm actually going to be interviewing someone that's a psychologist about that soon. I think we have him scheduled coming up. And just to share a little bit about an experience I had that was similar to that, it reminded me of when I was in a situation where I was working at a corporation and there was an acquisition and there were 2,000 contracts that need to be reviewed and moved over from one entity to another. And at the time, no one trusted the cloud. So everything was actually put on a computer screens that were not connected to the internet in a safe room, they called it. So I had to send, I don't know, I think it was like 5 attorneys that were doing their review to the location, which was out of state, to do those reviews in those rooms 8 hours a day for, it was maybe 3 or 4 weeks. But it was very manual and everything was tracked, everyone was recorded by each attorney and it's so much easier now to do that kind of volume. So really, I mean, you can almost say there's no excuse now for companies to do a thorough review because of the capability of the technology now allows you to do it. So, we really had to spend a lot of time and a lot of hours capturing all that information before. So
Exactly. I mean, we've got the tool where we can upload 5,000 contracts into it, hit a button, and within minutes we have all the data that we need.
Right.
It's really, really amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. So to kind of start to wrap this up, so I wanted to see if you could summarize in 1 or 2 sentences what it's actually like to be involved in a transition phase of an acquisition. Is it, from your experience being literally on the front line of supporting those transitions, what would you say in a very short sentence or 2 to summarize that experience?
I would say that if you have the right tools, the right people, and start early, that it doesn't have to be horrible. That's that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's a good point. My last guest made a point about the same thing. He said planning. I mean, planning is really underestimated. I mean, everybody knows you need to plan, but to actually commit to just doing it, you're going to see a lot better results, later on. It's proven over and over again that it just takes a little bit of planning, to make the experience better. So yeah, I appreciate that. That's
and if you start right when you know it's going to happen, and instead of waiting 3 or 4 months, jump right on it.
Right. Exactly. So do you have any final words for our audience before we sign off today?
I think that even though it's easy for me to say and not necessarily easy to do, but when you're working through an acquisition, you just slow down and step back from the frenzy that you have and just pat yourself on the back and your team, because the process is arduous and it can be non-forgiving. That tunnel, it's long and it seems really dark sometimes, but when you come out on the other side and you see what you've been able to accomplish, I mean, it really is remarkable. And you'll just know that you're a capable person, because an acquisition will push you and challenge you in ways that you probably didn't ever want to know. But then you can just look at yourself and say, man, I really am very strong and I can do almost anything if you get through that acquisition.
Yeah, definitely. I feel the same way. That's a good point. I really appreciate you coming on to our podcast today. It was a pleasure having you on the show. And I want to just mention we have some exciting guests lined up for our next episodes, including an M&A cybersecurity expert and a seasoned procurement consultant and a psychologist. So we've got those planned for the next several weeks. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next time on M&A Plus, The Art After the Deal.